Welcome to Slow News Day Live. My name is Steve+Poikonen. I am here in lockdown Boulder Creek, California, and I am joined. Stoked for this. Love this opportunity to have him back on the show. Friend of the Free Assange Vigils and friend of Slow News Day, Tareq Haddad, live from the United Kingdom. How are you, sir?
Very well, thank you. Thanks to have me on again.
Absolutely, man. I do enjoy these talks, and normally we're just on here to have a quick update about what has transpired in case management hearings for Julian Assange. Today we're going to stretch it out a little bit more and focus on some of the pieces that you've written out of your outlet, The Watchdog. So if you could please explain to the people who may have been living under a rock for the last 5 months what The Watchdog is and why it came to be.
Sure. So obviously, I kind of had that departure from Newsweek in November, and kind of I was in a situation where kind of doesn't matter what was happening with me personally. I just felt that there needed to be good press coverage of the Julian Assange hearings, just because kind of going off of previous reporting from mainstream outlets that it really wasn't the type of coverage that he should be receiving and the kind of attention to detail that he deserves. So I kind of just wanted to set something up that was going to cover that as well as possible and kind of get some of the facts out there. As I'm sure you know, there's a lot of journalism by omission, so it's always, they do report the correct facts that come out of court, but it's sometimes, more revealing what's not said. And, that first week of hearings in February, it wasn't planned, but every single day that I kind of wrote my news report, I was kind of comparing what other outlets had done. And my story kind of tended to be something that wasn't mentioned in any of the other news outlets. So that was kind of nice, but it was also, I guess, disappointing at the same time. But it's kind of a work in progress at the moment. I kind of had a save the world mentality by myself, which I kind of wanted to kind of set up this massive organization that I was going to try and kind of, have proper journalism again, and, with kind of ethics and all that kind of thing that's lacking these days. Kind of had a bit of a learning curve, and it's not anywhere near being a finished product just yet, but it's slowly getting there, and just kind of trying to build it up a little piece at a time, hopefully.
Well, the news and analysis that you're putting out of there is just top notch, man. And I wanted to highlight specifically an article that came out last week titled, oh God, I just had it in front, The Age of Big Brother. Because, and I told the audience this once or twice, but my mother was an English professor, and I grew up in high school. When I was a junior and senior in high school, I was grading her freshman English papers because I was frequently in trouble, and that was my punishment. But I was, intelligent enough or trained enough in the English language to be able to do that. And you talk a lot about gated institutional narratives, which in an acronym would be GIN, which would be the drink that they're serving all of these people to keep them drunk on the idea of power, and to ignore exactly what the phraseology that they're using really means. I just came up with that, so you don't have to follow. Like, you could look at me like I'm fucking crazy.
I'm with you.
But these gated institutional narratives, this soft language. I titled this video "What Would Carlin Do?" Because George Carlin has a lot of famous and high test bits about soft language. If you could break down what gated institutional narratives are and why the weaponization of soft language does such a detriment to us as, consumers, we're regular citizens.
Yeah, I mean, I think just first of all, I don't think I didn't invent this term. I think other people have been using it quite frequently. People like Eric Weinstein, who's quite a kind of prolific academic who's kind of getting into the podcast world, so I don't want to take credit for it. But yeah, it's essentially, we all use language that essentially, if there's something that's, kind of difficult to address, or, we even do it in our personal lives. It doesn't have to be kind of, we all kind of skirt around the issues to kind of avoid saying what things really are. And, I think this is kind of inevitable. So it's not necessarily a negative thing, but, like I tried to kind of outline in my piece, that it's kind of like a slow build-up of these things that, once you have a certain narrative, it becomes difficult to kind of go back from that. And the reason why it's so dangerous is that, we kind of end up living in a kind of completely different universe than the one that's actually existing. And I think, like yourself, I kind of read 1984 in high school, but I didn't actually really understand it because I came to the UK as an immigrant, and English was still kind of pretty new to me. I didn't actually even understand why people read like fiction books. I just didn't, because I was just trying to grasp the English language. But when I kind of read it again at a later age, it kind of really made me realize how like language is very important, and it kind of was very helpful in my journalism, because it's, once you kind of can see those different patterns of words being used, you can see the way that journalism is kind of, managing certain opinions by how things are phrased. And, if you're someone that reads the news on a regular basis, you even notice how they kind of flip sometimes from one or the other. The famous example is how, Al-Qaeda, we called them terrorists, but, once we had kind of groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda directly kind of working against Bashar al-Assad in Syria, they were no longer called terrorists, they were called moderate rebels. And I think, that's the most basic one that we can all kind of say, oh, well, I've seen that in the news, definitely. But, it happens all the time. It doesn't just happen in news, it happens in, every business and every organization.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's a weaponizing, really, of language, and the narrative managers that implement this phraseology do it with a deliberate intent to mislead, or at least that's the conclusion that I've come to after studying this for a fair amount of time. I want to touch on a section of the article here, especially as it relates to what we're seeing here with this pandemic, because you're out in front on the what is it, the NSCAI, NSCAI,
NSCAI, yeah, sorry.
It's our division. It's the U.S. division that deals with artificial intelligence, and its race to out China. There's a conversation that I've had with Whitney Webb as well. She's done some excellent work on this, but it's basically like you and Whitney Webb that have put this on paper, on a screen, as it were, and kind of looked into it. And the reality on the ground is the U.S. has a fairly newly formed bureaucracy or division that explores and deals with artificial intelligence exclusively, and in its dealing discusses openly and frequently how best to control the population. Now we've got Google and Apple who have come together to sell our location, or give away our location data. We've got Palantir in the UK, basically partnering with the National Health Service in order to be able to track and trace people that may have COVID. Is there a bright side to any of this, or are we just all going straight into like a Huxley meets Orwell dystopian nightmare?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I've had a bit of a pessimistic view about the whole situation because it does look so grim overall. But I think, you know, it's important to remember that, and I think this always happens through history, even though maybe there's not a lot of optimism to be had, but every time that the state apparatus kind of develops a new tool, there's always people on the other side of that that are concerned about freedom of speech and censorship that are kind of trying to counteract it. The problem is that, you know, these tools are getting more and more sophisticated, and, you know, if we do take it to the kind of extreme level where we have these kind of vaccines with you know, digital sensors inside that are going to be connected to 5G, that's going to be you know, geolocating people at a much more precise level than is currently possible, combining it with, you know, everything, all of that kind of thing, it does look extremely grim, especially for journalists as well. You know, I think we've had a lot of talk about these contact tracing apps, which everyone knows, you know, even at senior levels of the people that design these things, they know that they're not going to be effective in kind of managing how this virus is being spread. You know, if you think about public transport or a city like London or New York City, like if you walk down, you know, one street in New York City, how many people do you pass by in 30 minutes? You probably pass by like 300 people, you know, or children going to school, or you know, it's completely ridiculous. But I think what it does enable state surveillance to do is see who's congregating with who. It's going to make it harder for journalists to anonymously meet their sources or to meet certain whistleblowers. You know, so it does look very scary, and that's why I'm worried about it. But hopefully enough people are kind of waking up to these things, and we're going to be making tools to counteract them. Because I think, to be honest, some of these changes seem like they're inevitable at this point.
No, I agree. I've taken to I either leave my phone at home when I go out, or because I work in the trades, there was leftover copper from a flashing gig that I had. So I took a wooden box and I lined it in copper, and I lined the lid in copper, and then I'll put my phone in that if I have to take it with me somewhere, because that way I basically built a miniature Faraday cage for it, and it does transmit my location. It gets blocked by the copper. But I think journalists specifically are going to have to, if you can't combat the tech with tech, you've got to go low tech, and you've got to, at least, you know, while we still have encryption, arrange for a meet on an encrypted platform, and then leave your devices at home and maybe bring along an old school recorder. I don't even know if we can trust digital recorders, but that I haven't looked into if it emits a signal or not. But I mean, even like the old school mini tape recorder might have to come into play.
Or if you want to go real old school, use a bit of shorthand, which most journalists don't even know how to do. But yeah, good old pen and paper.
my shorthand's all over the place, but I can understand it. So if it works. My God, man, you should see this is the scribble I have for what I'm doing with Whitney, with those are my Whitney web notes. And they're complete. You know.
And I just have to say very quickly, actually, I have to thank Whitney for her amazing reporting, and I wouldn't have known about that document if it wasn't for her reporting. So yeah, and I guess that's kind of some of the promising signs that we're seeing, is that, you know, there are still people that are willing to talk about this. There are alternative platforms now that are, you know, that people can use, alternative to Twitter and YouTube and Facebook, that are censoring these things. They're popping up, you know. I think if this is the path that they want to go down, they're going to soon be out of business. So that's something that they should consider, you know.
Well, you can only monitor and limit speech so much before the audience gets bored, you know. And as YouTube's audience becomes more and more trained, or more and more like, just okay, you've got mainstream media, you've got you know, Jimmy Dore and Kyle Kalinske, and you've got like kid videos, and that's all YouTube's going to be. platforms like Rockfin, hopefully will become the go-to place for the information that's not censored, for content that's outside of the narrative. I have a fair amount of hope that Rockfin will become that place. And as far as Twitter and Facebook go, we went over this last night on the Vigil. Caitlin Johnstone wrote a great article tearing apart a piece in the Atlantic recently, and we went through that article a little bit, which talks about all of the censorship that tech companies are currently doing that people are largely unaware of. And when you and I talk about like we're getting censored on Twitter, the reaction from most people that aren't familiar with the censorship algorithms are like, you're just fucking crazy, dude. You get tinfoil hat off, all that shit. And here's this article that's talking about it as a benevolent thing or a necessary thing. So I'm going to keep that one handy to show people when, as look, they're praising it here. This is a thing that exists. Are you active on other platforms, or is there a one that you would suggest in particular? Because I'm trying to expand Slow News Day's presence on other platforms as well.
Not as of yet, but I'm kind of still trying to build everything, but I'm going to be looking to move, very soon. And I think just another point to raise on that, which I think is important, because even though not to kind of denigrate people that are trying to kind of make sense of what's currently going on, we do still have legitimate people that are kind of spreading false information. And that's not to say that everything that's getting censored is accurate, there is possibly people, but I think what it's actually leading to a more, when you start censoring stuff, it actually leads to more conspiracy theorizing. Because people are trying to make sense of it for themselves, which they should be doing, but also they end up not having that feedback from people. So if you put out a certain video where you discuss whatever it is that you believe, and it's free for everyone to look at, you'll get a mixture of comments, and based on how you are as a person, you'll take that feedback and you'll learn from it or ignore some of it. If there's constructive things on there that you're like, okay, this was kind of wrong, or I missed the point on this, now that's open to you. But like if YouTube just suddenly decides to take that video down and no one sees it, you kind of start to build up this mentality of, I must be on to something, I must be correct, and then you kind of just no one ends up kind of correcting that opinion, and it's just, you end up having people kind of veering off, and so it's not good.
We see all the time, like even a fairly innocuous conversation about 5G and why it may be bad for you, and why the Internet of Things, as it were, may present or will present an incredible series of problems that goes from that to getting censored to someone going, 5G caused coronavirus. And there's no barrier, there's not. And look, man, I'll entertain some wild shit. I will, I'll entertain the concept of it, but when it comes down to proof and evidence, that particular theory falls apart relatively quick.
Well, I think it's actually kind of interesting to talk about, because this is how I kind of started the premise of the article, is that kind of looking at it from like a philosophical point of view of like, okay, there's lots of different conspiracy theories, or just theories going around. So there was lots of people talking about Bill Gates, 5G, China, Fauci, and some of these had more merit than others, but certain ideas stuck, and the whole 5G thing, when I read it in a kind of mainstream website, of course it's like 5G doesn't actually cause coronavirus, but why? There's something that's kind of motivating people enough to be going out and burning towers in large numbers, you know. So it's like, instead of just saying all these people are crazy conspiracy theories, I just had the mentality of, okay, let's try and actually understand if there's more to it than that. Are they, is it linked to this, everything that's going on with coronavirus, China and everything? And then when I actually looked at the evidence, you know, there were links, which I presented in my article. Basically, 5G is going to be, you know, this technology that makes surveillance much more insidious than it already is. You know, if we think that we live in an Orwellian world right now of surveillance, 5G is going to make that 10 times worse.
No, I agree, and I always shudder whenever I get out of my county, because as soon as I cross over into Santa Clara County, which is, you know, the home of Silicon Valley, I'm in involuntary 5G. It's just my phone automatically switches over,
Right.
and shutting it off doesn't do any good. You know, ultimately, it really doesn't. Yeah. And I'm not trying to totally dismiss all 5G related theories. I think frequency manipulation is a very real thing. I see it happen. I've done it as a musician. You know, I've seen how people react when something's played at 540 or 440 as opposed to 432, and you know, I'm cognizant of the fact that, you know, your body chemistry can be affected by frequency manipulation. So I'm not dismissing out of hand that there isn't a component that 5G can play in all of this, but I think it would become much more relevant and much more dangerous if Bill Gates actually gets his ID 2020 and actually gets this vaccine. There's no reason to not entertain the idea that there won't be some sort of digital device inside the coronavirus vaccine that as Bill Gates wants it, in my opinion.
Well, we just had an announcement today from the UK that he's going to be receiving, or the Gavi Alliance is going to be receiving 1.65 billion over the next 5 years to kind of do this. And, you know, thanks to people at Twitter, they've been highlighting other articles from Matt Hancock, who's the health minister, showing that they were planning to introduce legislation for anyone kind of to make criticizing vaccines, you know, almost illegal. So you see these trends together at the same time, and you get a very clear picture of what's happening. And then also, and I think this is kind of the big theme of what's going on and why we have this kind of institutional like mistrust, is that every single person in a position of power right now has a huge conflict of interests. You know, every single person that you see at the, you know, Fauci, or even Chris Whitty here in the UK, or I think Ian Ferguson, or all these people have, you know, they're going to be making money some way from this. They're not doing this for the goodness of their heart, no matter, you know, regardless of what people think of their scientific abilities. You know, so I think that's kind of the big story here, and it's something that's been in politics since, I don't know, the 70s. But this is the thing. It's a slow evolution of the West, or the UK and the US, not addressing these things in our so-called democracies a long time ago, and now it gets to the point that the only people in charge are the ones that, you know, make big bucks off these deals. You know, they're not doing it for.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, we've at least here in our relief bills have seen the most massive transfer of wealth ever recorded, followed by the most massive transfer of wealth ever recorded. Even the small business loans get scooped up by giant companies. My wife does books and is a tax preparer for a number of people, and I mean, she would set an alarm to get up at midnight when it rolled over to apply for these things, and because she's sitting there typing it out relatively quickly on a keyboard and not, you know, creating an algorithm to go ahead and apply for her within fractions of a second. Even a couple of her clients got turned down for these emergency loans because they'd already maxed out on the amount of money that they were giving away. And it doesn't do anybody any good when the same nefarious characters throughout the years and we find out more and more as we explore like the Dark Winter series and Helen Beniski's reporting on Lockstep. The same people that are profiting off of this are the same people that held all of these simulated events that show the pathway to a post-pandemic police state. Especially with Bill Gates, who has spent millions and millions of dollars on image rehabilitation through the media. There was a point in the late 90s where Bill Gates was one of the most despised people on the planet. And you even allude to it in your article where he said investing in vaccines was the best investment he ever made. Bill Gates, widely known eugenicist, for him to be at the forefront of this should cause everyone to take a step back and be a little bit alarmed and want to explore it a little bit further.
And then what do you see in the mainstream media is why Bill Gates is the top man to lead us through this crisis, you know, in countless publications. And it's the exact same thing that you saw, you know, with Syria and like Elliot Higgins from Bellingcat, you know, these just kind of fluffy pieces that just don't include any real solid reporting about finances or all these kind of things. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I had something and I was responding to someone in the chat. I want to talk a little bit about Seth+Rich because before there was like the week before Julian+Assange's first round of the extradition hearing, you put out a piece in the Watchdog titled Assange's lawyers to argue UK extradition request is political, which it is. And this is a fantastic article. And by the way, like if you guys in the chat and watching this later aren't regularly reading the Watchdog, you should be. Tareq does incredible work here. And this article here is relevant today because WikiLeaks just released the warrant application for Roger Stone. Roger Stone was convicted of lying to the FBI on multiple accounts. The fact that he is a perjure monkey underscores and exonerates the WikiLeaks and drives home the point that they had we're not colluding with the GRU to make sure that Donald Trump got into the White House. But you write in this article, let's talk about the meeting with Rohrabacher, because that's something that we had a great conversation with Cassandra Fairbanks at when we were in DC, right when this was all hitting. Please refresh the folks at home how that went down.
Okay, so as far as I'm aware, and I think my memory's a little bit foggy on this too, but if you could correct me if I'm wrong anywhere. So obviously, Donald Trump was getting a lot of pressure, or I guess persecution, you could say, from the Democrats, who very clearly have been in working in unison with the intelligence agencies and you know, to try and discredit his presidency. And I'm not saying that as someone that's a massive fan of Donald Trump, but I think anyone objectively observing the situation can say that the intelligence agencies and the people that profit from war do not want Donald Trump to be president. And so they've been actively trying to get rid of him. And, you know, impeachment, Russiagate, all these kind of prosecutions that we've had that everyone's aware of. So, you know, he's through his channels, and I think through friends of Julian, I think Kim.com and people like Sean Hannity are kind of, so I think Kim.com and Sean Hannity are friends. So they were communicating to arrange some meetings between kind of officials of the Trump administration and Assange. At a certain point, I don't think it's clear exactly Rohrbacher was involved in those talks to. Actually, I just remember. I think Rohrbacher was on Fox News discussing Seth+Rich quite openly, and I believe that Trump saw that clip with Hannity and he called him into the White House. And then, kind of a few months later, he was in London meeting Assange to try and kind of get him to say that Seth+Rich was the source, because obviously, if that information comes out, it kind of puts the whole Russiagate lie to bed, and it also just would be very politically convenient because, and rightly so, it would show the deep corruption within the Democratic National Committee, especially kind of Hillary Clinton, who, if I was an American, I would not have been voting for her in 2016, regardless of how bad Donald Trump, or how bad you think Donald Trump is. I mean, this is kind of I think I wrote a letter at the time. It's like, no matter how egregiously bad you think Donald Trump is, he is not even in the same league as Hillary Clinton in my books.
Oh no, I agree with that 100%. Oh, it's okay. I'm trying, and I'm also like furiously to find
I don't know if I missed anything out from that. But obviously, I guess so. Rohrbacher goes to London to the Ecuadorian embassy, tries to get Julian to kind of give evidence or confirm that Seth+Rich is his source. WikiLeaks and to Julian, obviously, protecting sources is their number one priority. They wouldn't function as the safe haven for whistleblowers if they were going to be revealing their identities. It's kind of journalism 101. You don't reveal your sources, especially for such sensitive cases. And we see the consequences when the intelligence agencies know who specific whistleblowers are, as was the case with Seth+Rich. And for people that don't follow this stuff, that is not an outlier. The other example I like to mention here in the UK is Dr. David Kelly. Spoke out against the WMDs in Iraq, and then kind of found a few hundred yards from his home, kind of before the war started. So,
and in the specific case of WikiLeaks and the DNC emails and Seth+Rich, it wasn't just Seth+Rich who wound up a murder victim here. We've got Matthew Ratner, and was it John or Jim? It's right here.
John Jones.
Jones, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those cases I'm not as. I didn't have, at that kind of time, I didn't have time to look into all the specifics, but I think the people around WikiLeaks are still kind of, they don't like to discuss these things openly, but, they did say that their deaths were very suspicious at the least. And I think this is kind of the trouble that we get into in these types of things, is that it's almost down to us to prove that it was a murder or something nefarious, because by the official counts, it's a suicide or it's kind of a fast-forming illness. I think with Ratner, it was kind of this fast-developing cancer that that killed him in a space of weeks.
Yeah.
Sounds kind of like a kind of poisonous substance of some sort, but again, it leaves us in this difficult position because we're the ones having to kind of find out what's going on when it should be, the police forces and so on.
Sorry, my 7-year-old came wandering back into the office here.
She can join in.
I'm being reminded by the chat too, not to forget Michael Hastings when we're going down the Seth+Rich rabbit hole.
I actually don't know that name, so I'm not familiar with any of that.
Michael Hastings, as far as I remember, was a journalist who was trying to uncover exactly what happened to Seth+Rich, and he died in a car crash under very mysterious circumstances, and it was one of those very hackable newer cars. So there's a deep rabbit hole down there, but he was doing everything he could to I think he was simultaneously working on Seth+Rich and the actual story of Pedogate, not Pizzagate. Pizzagate being the distraction that everybody can make fun of. And Pedogate being the undeniable fact that there is a child sex trafficking ring among the predator class that's international and is used as both blackmail and sport fucking.
And I guess now with the context of Jeffrey Epstein, I guess, you know, that kind of gets a lot more credence, that type of... I have to say that I actually didn't look into those allegations too much, but
yeah, well, I mean,
I'm sure they're
it was I'm sure that was just dismissed out of hand. Like, how could you possibly even consider the fact that there's a child trafficking ring ran out of the basement of a pizza place that doesn't have a base? It's all bullshit. Look the other way. And then a couple of months later, you know, everybody's talking about Jeffrey Epstein, and Jeffrey Epstein goes away through either removal or murder, and now nobody's talking about Jeffrey Epstein because we've got COVID 1984 to deal with. You know, there are 48 countries were protesting. There were mass numbers of people in the streets globally. Free assembly is shut down during COVID 1984. Surveillance state ramps up to, you are so right when you're like, man, you know, we've beaten the Orwell horse to death, and in fact, people are aware of how much they're being surveilled. In Orwell's book, they were not, and they were ignorant of the surveillance that they lived under. We're cognizant of it, but we don't fucking care. You know, or not enough people care. So to call what the surveillance state is doing Orwellian doesn't even do it justice. We got to find a new phrase to describe it, and I don't know what that is. I don't, you know, maybe Thielian or whatever. I don't, just fuck it, because Peter Thiel's an asshole. I don't know. But we got to find a new term for it. We do. I'm not necessarily here to disparage Peter Thiel, but I will. You know, that guy's a scumbag.
Yeah, it's kind of strange because I mentioned Eric Weinstein before, and I, you know, have kind of started listening to his podcast, and he was his first guest, and that podcast was actually very informative, and I learned a lot from it. And, you know, they're two very clever people discussing some of the problems in society. So it's kind of left me in a very strange place of, you know, he's clearly a very intelligent man. I just don't know enough about him, and I don't know if he has more sinister motives or what, but, you know, the more that I'm learning about Palantir, the more I dislike what's happening with that. So it's tricky, but I think to kind of raise an interesting point, that kind of to loop back into what we were saying at the beginning, is that, like, you know, for maybe some journalists that are hopefully watching, but I maybe shouldn't hold my breath, but, you know, I remember working for International Business Times at the time of his murder, and, you know, I wrote maybe one or two pieces at the time that was just kind of contemporaneous reporting of what we knew. And, you know, I guess, you know, I kind of, maybe I feel a bit guilty about that situation, because it's like, I understand why these things happen, is that, you know, you're in a situation where you're in an office of people, and then it kind of gets decided that this is kind of a conspiracy theory, this is a no-go topic, and you're in a position of, do you keep your job and let this one slide? Or, you know, do you kind of, do you quit and try and tell the truth? And I think what happens is that a lot of these kind of little deviations from truth that we have to accept, usually they're not ones that are deal breakers for you. I remember at the time of...
Oh, that's a really good sidebar we could get into. Finish your thought, but I want to explore that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd love to, because I think, at the time, I was definitely frustrated that I couldn't report about Seth+Rich, and there was plenty of evidence that was coming out. But, I'd spent... This is the thing, to make it to kind of a national... mainstream publication took a lot of work for me. I left another job. I had to go train and work my way up through a local newspaper. And then, even though I'm extremely passionate, you work really hard to get somewhere, and then you're there, and then it's like you just give it all up in an instant to try and write this one detail. And I think for most people, it's, sorry Seth+Rich, or sorry Julian, or sorry the thousands of people that are dead in Syria or Iraq or whatever, but we're all kind of self-interested. So I understand why these kind of things happen, and I think what we're witnessing right now is that it's happening at such a mass level. Like it happens across every organization, that most of us have no idea, like the things that the West, America and the UK have been doing for 50, 60, 70 years now.
No, you're absolutely right. I've spoken about this article on the show before. I don't know if you read it or not. And it's one of those websites where you only get to look at 5 items before it's behind a paywall. But if you haven't read it, I'll send it to you. It's an essay called 3 Cheers for Socialism, written by a Christian socialist. There's things that I have a problem with in the article in terms of just how Anglo-centric it is. But that aside, the author discusses very plainly, like, Americans as a rule don't know our own history. We don't taught it. We're not encouraged to explore it. And by the time the fraction of us that get to the university level do get to the university level, you even have to specialize in a certain branch of history in order to learn it. I don't know if it's the same in the UK, but I assume that it is. But the level of self-censorship that we're expected to go through as journalists is in my mind criminal. I may have told you this before. Once upon a time, I was part of the Nation. I worked for the Nation. I was part of their 2008 election team, and I started out shadowing Mike Gravel at the time because he was the most interesting candidate to me. Then I called on to Dennis Kucinich. They torpedoed his campaign at Iowa. Started looking into John Edwards. Found out that he was a total fucking scumbag. And at that point, around March anyway, they were starting to really push Barack Obama. And I hadn't paid much attention to him yet. So I started looking into Barack Obama and who he was and how he got to be where he is. And when I listened to his 2004 DNC speech, where there's no red America, there's no blue America, there's only the United States, of that speech that like everybody fucking loved. I dated a chick that fucking listened to it while she jogged. It was that really. That was a short relationship. Man, I wonder what that girl was from Paducah, Kentucky. I wonder what she do these days. No, I don't. I really don't. At any rate, that speech, I was like, holy fuck, man, this guy is being groomed to be the next president, you know, and I stopped looking at all the other candidates entirely, focused on Barack Obama, wrote an article that I brought to the Nation, brought to the political editor, who at the time was a 7-foot-tall Opie motherfucker named Chris Hayes. He was my boss. Chris Hayes was my boss. And Chris Hayes fired me because I wrote an article called Barack Obama, Reagan with a Tan. And that was not the tone that the Nation was looking for. And I was given an option: scrap the article and keep working, or die on this hill. And I was like, but it's the truth. I'm supposed to tell the people who read this the truth. And they're like, yeah, no, nobody. So not only did I get fired, I got completely fucking blacklisted, and everything that I had written for the Nation throughout that entire like 5-month period vanished, disappeared, scrubbed from the web fucking entirely. I had like nothing in a CV to take to another outlet. Dude, it was brutal. It was. And I stayed away from journalism for a long time because of it. And now what I do isn't necessarily journalism, but it's why I have you on. It's why I have Elizabeth Boss on. It's why I have Whitney on, because you guys are doing the on the ground journalism that, in my opinion, people really need to be paying attention to.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think the kind of feeling that I had when I quit Newsweek is, you know, like you think that you're the only person that this has happened to, and then the amount of people that reached out to me that said, you know, this exact same story. I think it happens so many times that people don't even know about it. You know, like if you hadn't have told me about this now, I'd never be, you know, never been aware of any of that. And so you think about that on like a systemic level, the amount of news stories that never see the light of day, you know, because at every corporation, this is probably happening all the time.
Well, and we're finding this out with the Tara Reade story too. That a number of outlets had been contacted back in 1993, and they were like, "Yeah, no." Can you imagine how many news outlets in Washington D.C. get contacted on a weekly basis by someone who's saying I got groped or I got sexually assaulted by a sitting member of Congress, and they're like, "Yeah, no. We're not going to do that."
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And again, I don't want to be someone that's justifying it, but sometimes having been in that, and I'm sure you've been in that position too, it is difficult. You know, sexual misconduct is, for a journalist, is probably one of the hardest things to report on. And in the courts too, it's one of the hardest things to prosecute, which doesn't justify it. But I think it makes that situation much more difficult. So I kind of understand, but at the same time, it doesn't justify why that story doesn't get covered. It's definitely a challenge for journalists, you know, because to write that story, you need to have unshakable evidence, really. And sometimes, because of the nature of these crimes, it's sometimes difficult. I don't know. I mean, thankfully, with some of that is coming out now, and not to justify any of these publications, especially, I'm sure in that time, it was at a time when journalists actually, especially for a bigger publication, they had the time to go after these kind of things. But nowadays, you know, like when I was working at Newsweek, it was, you have to write 4 stories a day. I'm just pulling it off Twitter. Members of the public don't even bother to phone in anymore, because they know that you know, most of the journalists don't care there. You know, no one leaves the office. No one actually goes out, talks to real people. They're just talking to people from think tanks or spokespeople. And that's where all of their journalism is coming from. It's not coming from victims, or it's not coming from people that have actual information, or they're not spending time investigating stuff.
And that's what I mean. That's what makes the journalism that WikiLeaks did, the concept of scientific journalism, the concept of we're going to look at your primary source documents. We're going to talk to the primary source people, and we're just going to our reporting is going to be a summary of what the documents contain. And then you, as the consumer of this journalism product, are allowed to make your own decision about it. But circling back to Seth+Rich a little bit, and then we're gonna close out because Josh has to sleep and I have shit to do. You do right that WikiLeaks insiders confirmed that he was, in fact, the source of the DNC leaks. Yeah,
I think I have to check but it wasn't. It was associates of Julian+Assange, so close friends of Julian's. Who?
Dude, I'm trying to find it.
It's I think 7:30. It's down there in the article.
Yeah, a number of close Assange associates have since confirmed to the watchdog that Rich was in fact the source of the emails. I'm not going to ask you to name those people. I'm going to ask you if you think that we're going to see any real movement forward on putting this issue to bed over the next year or so. But I mean, you know who told you, by all means, do that.
No, I couldn't say, but I don't know the name of the actual cases, and you might be better informed as to this than I am. But I'm aware that there's maybe 3 different court cases happening in the United States right now, where, well, one of them is Judicial Watch, I think, is suing the FBI for what documents they have, and obviously they are extremely well funded and, you know, have a lot of support, and, you know, people might disagree with their politics, but, you know, they're an organization that's set up to kind of oversee the enforcement agencies, so power to them. They become a little bit complicated, I think, because Seth+Rich's brother, I believe his name is Aaron Rich, is suing multiple people, or people are suing him, and there's countersuits and all sorts of stuff. But
yeah, I can summarize that pretty quick. A guy named Ed Butowski has a number of complaints out, a number of lawsuits out, and it's in response to the fact that Aaron Rich and Seth+Rich's parents, Aaron Rich's parents, will sue anyone who mentions this conspiracy, and will name Seth+Rich and Aaron Rich, for that matter, as part of the people who leaked this material. The Butowski complaints are in multiple jurisdictions, and multiple news outlets are involved. And Ray McGovern, friend of the Free Assange Vigil and soon to be first-time guest on Slow News Day, I haven't set a date for that yet, but we're talking, is one of the people who's named in this lawsuit, you know, this counter. And VIPS, as you know, and as you've cited, has provided a very detailed memo exposing that the DNC emails were in fact downloaded off of a server by an individual and not hacked over the ether. I do think that there's some opportunity for closure on the horizon in terms of the Seth+Rich case. I don't know if it's necessarily going to come from Tom Fitton in Judicial Watch, with much more of a partisan organization. I hope they get their FOIA. I do, because that benefits all of us. You know, but in terms of their suit, it's going to be a harder sell because they're such a partisan outlet. Whereas the Butowski complaints, everyone who's ever said Seth+Rich's name during like the 2016 to 2017 uproar over it is mentioned in this, and that's Ray McGovern and Bill Binney and John Kiriakou to Cassandra Fairbanks and Tom Fitton and people like that. So it's really covering the spectrum of people involved in both journalism and in accuracy in media, which is ostensibly what this is. Go ahead.
I think that you've heard the Seymour Hersh tapes.
Oh yeah, I actually on Slow News Day on this channel, if you go to the playlist section, the entire 22-minute conversation is on there.
That's a very important conversation.
It underscores a couple of things. It really underscores that Butowski's on the right track, that Seth+Rich was in fact the person who provided this information to WikiLeaks, and that Cy Hersh is a fucking asshole. I
will defend Cy Hersh to the death.
But yeah, you listen to him, you're like, my God, what a prick! But he's Cy fucking Hersh, so
Cy Hersh, man. I mean, this kid, I don't know who he was, but you know, this guy, he's doing him a favor. And also, the fact that I guess it's in the public interest, but, I think this guy had been pestering him for a while, and he's like, listen, I'll tell you what I know. Stop bugging me. But hey, he was honest. He told him a lot of useful information. And
no, he really did. He really did. And again, just for the people listening right now, if you want to hear that full conversation, go to the playlist section on Slow News Day. It's right up there at the top. Do 22 plus minutes, totally unedited. Really, really fascinating conversation between Butowski and Cy Hirsch there. And yeah, like Cy Hirsch, he sounds like his whiskey needed to smoke a cigarette after what he'd been through. It's just legendary shit, right?
Yeah, I can't hear a negative word about Cy Hirsch. I just won't accept it.
I'm not saying a negative word about Cy Hirsch.
Yeah,
he's earned that shit. He has.
Yeah,
anyone who broke the Miley massacre gets to be a condescending prick to whomever's bugging him on the phone.
Yeah. It's funny though, because it's funny when you hear him talk about Assange, because he's like, describes him as a maniac, and the fact that he was hacking the CIA at 16 or whatever. And I think that, but I think I never actually finished this story, because it was one of those stories that the more I tried to write it, it just turned into a novel. But I tried to kind of write like almost a short history of Assange's kind of arc from being a child to where he is now, just to kind of try and correct the narrative. But you see the fact that, he had access to these kind of, very sensitive documents at a young age, when it was kind of the wild west of the internet, where you could just, it was like a Rubik's Cube or something to kind of get on the NSA's database to see all these, crazy things. And then, after he had that experience where he goes to, the two people that he was, hacking with, kind of, I don't know what I forgot what the American terminology is for this, but we say dobbed him in, ratted him out. He kind of understood that the whole ethos of WikiLeaks is that, the state kind of turns good people into, people that are not, willing to withhold the truth, or to kind of betray their enemies just to kind of protect their necks. So that's why that's from there he created this organization that, there's no hacking involved, no matter what anyone will tell you. It's all people that kind of have the courage to come forward themselves and stuff. So I think that's an important point to note, because I didn't want to kind of end it on the fact that Assange hacked the CIA at 16, but
hey, look, I mean, if you're, and in the defense of Julian Assange here, and then we'll wrap up, because Jason Burmis is going live, and that means like half my chat's going to disappear, including me. So it's going to be a weird show if I'm not here. He hacked to look and learn, not to wreak havoc. And that knowledge led to the creation of scientific journalism and what WikiLeaks does and why it's so fucking vital. Tareq Haddad, thank you so much, brother. I love hanging out with you, man. And I'm a little bit bummed that it's only virtually, but maybe we'll get off lockdown eventually, and I can get my ass over to the UK.
Likewise.
Please tell the folks where they can find you, and yeah, thank you again.
Yeah, so thewatchdog.net is where I'll be publishing everything. Tareq_Haddad for Twitter, and yeah, thanks a lot. I really appreciate you having me on, and I hopefully will be making my way out to Cali one day as well. So,
oh yeah, hopefully I can still afford to live here. That's going to do it for this episode of Slow News Day. I will be back at 3 p.m. with Robbie Yeager, who is a research extraordinaire for the MCSE network. He has found out a lot of information about where the Intercept got their money from this year. We're going to discuss that, and we're going to kick around Ro Khanna. So that's going to be last. That'll do it for this Slow News Day. I'm Steve+Poikonen. Good luck to us all.